Joining us tonight is a very special guest, Mark Epstein. This is the biological brother of Jeffrey Epstein, now dead. Mr. Epstein, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
Mark, if I may call you that.
Sure.
You have been disturbed from day one about the claim your brother, Jeffrey Epstein, committed suicide. You say that did not happen. Why?
Well, first of all, it was sort of like almost day two. What happened when I first heard that Jeffrey was found dead from apparent suicide, I heard it on CNN. The government didn't notify me as they claimed. I heard it on CNN. And at first, I had no reason to doubt that because, I knew he was in jail. He was potentially facing a very long term. I knew he wouldn't want to live like that. He didn't have any children to worry about. Our parents are gone, and he wouldn't have to worry about me. So there was no reason to doubt that. But then the next morning, I had to identify his body because I'm the next of kin, and they did the autopsy. And so far, the same thing. I just assumed it was a suicide. But then the city pathologist who did the autopsy, with Michael Bottom, there's forensic pathologist on my behalf, witnessing this, they both came out of the autopsy room and they said they couldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. Now, that never appears in any government report, and no one's speaking about that the two qualified forensic pathologists who did the autopsy could not call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. And then a few days later, Barbara Sampson, who was the chief medical examiner, she declares it was a suicide. And let's be clear, Barbara Sampson never saw the body. She wasn't at the autopsy, and after the autopsy was over that day, we claimed the body. So she never saw it. Just like Ash Patel made that statement that, because he's a prosecutor and everything else, he said, it's suicide when you see it. I mean, he said that in a congressional or a Senate hearing, under oath I would take. And he said, it's suicide when you see it. The first questions that came to mind was, well, how many suicides has he seen? Okay, and also, he never saw the body. He never saw the scene. I don't think he was at the scene of the crime that day, or I don't know if he was there afterwards, but that wouldn't matter. So it's like everything seems to be covering up the fact that the pathologist who did the autopsy wouldn't call it a suicide. Other people are calling it a suicide, ignoring these very qualified professionals. Dr. Bottom has done about 500 autopsies on prison deaths, and I'm not sure how many Dr. Roman did, certainly more than Cash Patel.
With us, everyone, is Mark Epstein. This is Jeffrey Epstein's brother, who doesn't have a dog in the fight, no skin in the game to opine as to whether Epstein committed suicide or not. But what he's saying is very, very disturbing. Day one, Mark Epstein, I was concerned about the markings, and I've prosecuted and investigated many, many homicides, more than I can count, and have investigated suicides as well to determine if they were homicides. And the first thing that jumped out at me was the marking on your brother's neck, which was a straight across horizontal ligature mark. And when someone hangs themselves, even from the side of a bed, think about Robin Williams, who committed suicide by use of a ligature from a doorknob. Okay, this is not a traditional hanging, for instance, from an elevated point. Even from that type of suicide from a bed, you would see a U or a smiley marking on the neck. This was a straight horizontal ligature mark, indicative of someone strangling him with a ligature from behind. It's a subtle but important distinction, which I will discuss momentarily with a forensic expert. Let me understand, Mark Epstein, you just stated that you learned about the suicide allegation from TV?
Yeah, I was actually in Norfolk, Virginia, having breakfast at a restaurant, and the television was on tuned to CNN, and I saw my brother's picture appear, and they said that he was found dead from an apparent suicide. That's how I learned about this. I mean, the Justice Department report, they said they notified me. They did not. There's a lot of errors in the Justice Department report.
Why would they have lied about that?
Oh, they're trying to make it look like a suicide.
Why? Why do you believe the government? And I'm not one for conspiracies, Mark, at all. Why? Because I don't think people can keep their yaps shut long enough to maintain a conspiracy. That's why. But in this case, the refusal to release the files that were promised to us months ago, promise after promise after promise, the confusion around suicide v. homicide, the edited video. And again, we're hearing from DC, well, there's nothing in the files. Well, if there's nothing in the files, release the files. We have got, I think now, 4 suicides connected to your brother's case. 4 suicides. Virginie Giuffre, your brother, his French counterpart, according to law enforcement, and 2 other alleged victims. Now, 5 people commit suicide? Can that possibly be a coincidence, Mark Epstein?
Well, there's also other things that raise the question. Like also a few days after the death, Bill Barr, the then Attorney General, came out publicly and stated that he saw the video and he saw that nobody went in or out of the tier, and that convinced him it was a suicide. And when I heard that, I thought, this is ridiculous. I thought, why is the Attorney General himself watching this whole night-long video? Couldn't he have somebody in his office watch it and say, hey, Bill, nobody went in or out? That was number one. And number two, to assume that it was a suicide because nobody went in or out when there were 12 other prisoners on that tier that would not have to go in or out of that door if they were going to kill somebody on the tier. And I was told that cell doors were left unlocked that night. And I was also told by somebody who's familiar with the prison that they weren't surprised to hear that. So, and also to think that somebody could get to Jeffrey's tier, go inside, kill somebody, and then leave completely undetected, it's just like a stupid statement. That, that's not what you base it on. We can't find out who the other prisoners on that tier were. When did they get there? And where are they now? There's been no interviews of all the prisoners on the tier, which would normally be done in a situation like that. There's no record of that. So when I heard Bill Barr say that, and then, the forensic pathologist said they couldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. I mean, if you just looked at the facts of this and forget it was Jeffrey Epstein and forget the case against him for a minute, this doesn't look like a suicide. You would investigate this as a homicide. And then also the night when they locked up, but there's a record of, we know about the 2 guards that got in trouble, because they weren't doing the rounds, Tobin Noel and Michael Thomas. Now, Michael Thomas came on shift in the middle of the night. So he wasn't there when they locked up the tier. And there's never ever just one guard there. So in the report, there's a mention of an unnamed guard number 1 and an unnamed guard number 2. The question is, who are they and why are they unnamed? Are they actual prison guards? Could they have been put there to kill somebody and then they disappeared into ether without any record of who they are? There's all these unanswered questions that in a normal, clear, honest case, even if it was a suicide, these questions would not be kept secret. There's just too much mystery about this.
As a matter of fact, Mark Epstein, if this were any case but your brother's, everything would be very, very transparent with a simple FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. Because Epstein's case is over. He's dead. It is no longer an ongoing investigation as it relates to him. So, if that's true, why haven't all of these questions been answered and why haven't these files been released? I've handled literally so many cases, thousands of cases, I can't count them. And when a case is over, say the perp dies or the appeals are exhausted, the files are released. The perp's dead. Epstein is dead. These files should be released. You know, you mentioned FBI Director Kash Patel. Did you state, Mark Epstein, that Patel stated, you know, I know a suicide when I see one?
Yeah, he said that it's a public record. He said that in the government hearing. Yeah, he listed his credentials as a prosecutor.
He's not a medical doctor. He's a lawyer.
Well, that's what I said before. I said, yeah, he's not a forensic pathologist. He doesn't have a medical degree. I even joked. I said, maybe he has a Boy Scout merit badge in first aid. What is he basing his expertise on? That's the question. Also, understand something. When the government quickly calls this a suicide, but that sort of kills any investigation, because if it's a suicide, there's two questions on the suicide. One, how did they do it? And two, why? You know, and the how do they do it is usually simple. You know, I say if you find somebody, you know, splattered on the sidewalk, well, they jumped off of a building. If they're laying in a pool of blood with a gun on the floor, well, they shot themselves. You know, it's a pretty simple answer if it's how somebody committed suicide. The why doesn't matter because, you know, in this case, he's dead. But it stops the investigation. There's no reason to investigate any further.
Well,
that's
of
why
course,
they call it a suicide so fast.
In jurisdictions where suicide is a crime, the perp is the dead person. It's very obvious. So when something is named a suicide, when it's determined to be a suicide, that ends all investigation. There's nothing to investigate if it's a suicide. Homicide, altogether different. In addition to Patel, now the theory is emerging, Mark Epstein, that your brother, Jeffrey Epstein, was not just a multimillionaire, that he was actually a U.S. and Israeli intelligence service spy. And that is why the files are not being released, because there is sensitive information in the files as it relates to U.S. security. What do you make of the claim that your brother was in fact an intelligence agent?
Well, I've heard this for years already. This is not the first time that's been raised. I have no idea. She didn't tell me what he was doing. So, as I said before, I don't want to speculate on anything, because I start speculating, I lose credibility. I like to stick to facts. You know, so I have no idea about what Jeffrey was doing, if for anything. But I do believe he was killed to quiet him for the information he had.
What information?
Well, you know, I've said publicly before in the 2016 election, he told me that he didn't tell me what he knew, but if he said what he knew about the candidates, Trump being one, they'd have to cancel the election. So he obviously had some dirt on Donald, you know. So he said if he said what he knew, they'd have to cancel the election. That's what he told me. You can make out of that whatever you want, but that's a quote. So you could take that wherever you want.
What disturbs you the most, Mark Epstein? Let's get off the allegations that your brother was a spy. Although that has now reared its ugly head as an excuse why these files are not being released. We've all heard of redaction. I've had to redact many documents before they are released. And you are to redact or mark out with a black magic marker. That's what I'm talking about, redact. Only sensitive portions. Why can't the files be released with any intelligence-related information, if there is any, redacted? What about the other thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, Mark?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, they should release everything they can. I have no qualms with that. You know, and then the question also becomes, you know, if Bill Barr made the statement, you know, to quash the investigation, you know, that it was a suicide, which, like you said, ends investigations, and Kash Patel is claiming it's a suicide without any expertise, he never saw the body either, you know, and it's quickly deemed a suicide. You know, if he was killed, who ordered the hit, so to speak? Who are these people covering up for? That should be the question that we're looking at. Because most people who look at all the facts believe it was a homicide. You know, people see a little bit here, a little bit there. You know, I get these 15 minutes to talk on a podcast or something. You have to look at all the facts. It would take, you know, quite a lot of time. We have amassed a lot of information. And everyone who has seen the bulk of it, nobody thinks it's a suicide. And so who is being protected? That's the question.
For those of you just joining us, we are speaking tonight to Mark Epstein. This is Jeffrey Epstein's brother. And the issue is not whether we like or hate, love or hate Jeffrey Epstein. We don't have to condone what he was accused of doing. Of course we don't. The issue is, why are these files not being released? Now, we've been told from the highest source that there is no, quote, client list. There may not be a client list in the way that you imagine. You open a little black book and you go through it alphabetically and you find names and phone numbers and emails and addresses. That may not exist. But those files could contain indications and names, descriptions of events, flights, and so much more to impugn the integrity of many, many highly placed individuals, multimillionaires, celebrities. We don't know. Why don't we know? Because the files have not been released. And now with claims that the video from the night of the death, as Mark calls it, the murder, has been doctored. It was released as raw footage. It is anything but raw, according to experts.
Nancy, let me say something. I don't think somebody got into the tier to kill him and then left. So the video's not going to show that. But what I want to see, which also we can't get, is the video of the infirmary area of the prison. Because when Jeffrey was found dead, after they tried to work on him, which I don't know why, because the autopsy showed he was dead for at least 2 hours when he was found. At least. Most likely a lot more. And there's other reasons for that. But at least 2 hours. So he was taken to the infirmary. When the fire department EMT people got to the jail from the 911 call, Jeff's body was already in the infirmary. So I'd like to see the video footage, on all the cameras from the prison cell where he was to the infirmary and in the infirmary itself, because there's cameras all over that place. We can't get any additional video footage because this would show the condition that Jeff's body was in, how it was handled. And then there's a picture of them wheeling him out of the prison. They go to the hospital. He's on a gurney and he's got a neck brace on and he's intubated. And the EMT guys are squeezing an air balloon to try to get air into his lungs. Now, these are professional medical people. And Jeff's been dead for 2 hours. So sort of why the charade of trying to make it look like he was potentially revivable? I mean, they wouldn't, the mark in his neck that you saw in the photograph, it stayed in his neck. That's the indication that he was dead for at least 2 hours. So why? And then I have a photograph of him from the hospital where he's actually wearing a hospital gown. He's dead on a gurney with a hospital gown on. Someone put his arms through the sleeves and, to kind of tie in the back. But why did they dress his dead body in a hospital gown? Normally, dead bodies are either in body bags or covered by a sheet. So why the charade? Also, what I was told by people on the scene is that there was somebody there with a handheld video camera in the prison infirmary and in the hospital. Where's the footage from that handheld video camera? This is all stuff that would, like as you said, would normally be open and available in a regular case, in a regular suicide. But nothing's being released.
Mark, I've got to tell you something, Mark. I have investigated and prosecuted and covered literally thousands of homicides, of deaths. I've never seen a dead body put into a hospital gown. Never. Not once. That's very disturbing. I had not heard that detail until you just told me that. So you have a video of your brother wearing a hospital gown.
Not a video, a photograph. That's unmistakable. It's Jeffrey in the hospital gown on a gurney in the hospital. Yeah, and when I first saw that, I got a question to somebody who was on the scene. I said, "What was Jeffrey wearing when he was found?" I thought, well, if he was wearing a hospital gown when he was found, it makes sense. But it turns out, no, he wasn't wearing a hospital gown. He was wearing the prison orange shorts and shirt when he was found. So someone went through the trouble of dressing this dead body in a hospital gown.
Why do you believe that there is a cover-up happening right now? I already know you believe he was murdered. You don't refer to it as a suicide or a death. You refer to Jeffrey Epstein's murder, your brother. Why do you believe there's a cover-up now, Mark Epstein?
Well, it's always been covered up. It never came out and said it was, anything other than a suicide, even though the actual pathologists who did the autopsy, the only two, both claimed that they couldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide.
Mark, according to reports, you actually laughed at the handling of the so-called Epstein files. Why?
But it's just so blatantly wrong. It's just wrong the way this is being handled. And if you believe, as I do, that this is a cover-up, it's sort of like, every time, like I said before, every time they do something or say something, it just puts their foot further down their throat. They're digging a deeper hole for themselves because nobody's believing anymore what they're saying. Even, the supporters it's not a partisan issue for me, but the president's supporters are getting really annoyed and breaking away because they don't like being lied to.
I'm with you on that, Mark. I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I really don't care. I think they all lie, and I have to hold my nose when I vote. That said, I don't have a political dog in the fight, but I know we were promised that these files would be released. We were told over and over and over, and now they're not. It stinks to high heaven. The case is over. Why are the files being withheld? You stated that you laughed. What is amusing about it? Is that are you laughing out of irony? What makes you laugh about this situation?
Well, the thing that really laughed at was the main thing was Cash Patel's line. I thought, just how stupid is that for him to claim a suicide when you see one, when he didn't see this suicide. He didn't see Jeff's body or anything about it. This was almost 6 years ago, and he's now claiming a suicide when you see it. I mean, how does he expect anyone to believe him, give him any credibility on a statement like that? To me, it was funny. It was just, it was so ridiculous.
Maybe I would laugh if I weren't so disturbed as a crime victim myself that we're not getting the answers that we were promised. Do you believe Ghislaine Maxwell knows anything?
She was around a lot. I have nothing personal in the dogfight with her, but she probably knows a bunch. She was around for a lot of this stuff. That was the area when she and Jeffrey were close.
Mark Epstein joining us, Jeffrey Epstein's brother. He is convinced Epstein did not die by his own hand and has brought up multiple inconsistencies with what we are being told is true. Final thought, Mark?
It's not only me that's convinced. It's everybody who looks at all the information we've amassed so far, and there's more coming in. We're finding new information that will be out. But again, I don't want to speculate, and I don't want to put information out that I don't know for sure. But there's more stuff coming out, and it's not just me. It's not just my fight. A lot of people, most people who've seen, if not all the people who've seen all the information we have, nobody out of that group, nobody believes it was a suicide.
Well, Mark, you just said something else extremely interesting to me and significant. It's not just about you. It's not just about your brother, Jeffrey Epstein. It's about what's right and what's wrong and broken promises. And the fact that our whole system is based on seeking the truth, regardless of what that truth may be. Maybe we'll get the files and there'll be nothing in there. Maybe it will be, this morning I had oatmeal, then I took a jog in Central Park. I don't know. But the fact that we're not getting them, the fact that we're being told there's nothing in the files. Well, if that's true, then release them. This is no way to run an investigation.
It's not a partisan. Every American citizen should be concerned that here you have an American citizen who was killed in prison under federal protection. That should disturb everybody if that could happen. Also, what's part of the story is that in a few days after the death, they were trying to have to appeal the bail decision for Jeffrey to see if he can get bail. And he was putting up it would have been the largest bail in U.S. history. And a hearing was coming up for that. So, again, I wasn't involved in the day-to-day thing, and I found out about that afterwards, that the hearing was soon to come. And I know Jeffrey, I would say, well, if he was going to commit suicide, he would wait to see if he got bail. Because if he got bail, he'd be out of jail. He'd be living in his house with an ankle monitor on and armed guards to make sure he didn't go anywhere and cameras, but he wouldn't be in jail. So why would you kill yourself before that bail hearing? I could see if he had the bail hearing and it was denied, and then he didn't want to spend another year in jail awaiting trial. Okay, that's a reason to take yourself out. But that hearing didn't come up yet. It was soon to happen. So why would he kill himself before the hearing for bail? Doesn't make sense to anybody.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense, Mr. Epstein. We wait, as God willing, justice unfolds. Goodbye, Mr. Epstein.
Thank you.